Welcome to the Double Our Body Transformation podcast. Today we've got Dr. Dean on the 88th episode of the Double Our Body Transformation podcast. He's got a wealth of knowledge and has a PhD in organic chemistry. He's the owner of a UK-based supplement company known as Supplement Needs. Amazing products. He's got a background in pharmaceutical chemistry as well, and he's really well known for applying functional medicine practices in the sport of bodybuilding to help minimize the risk that comes along with the sport. He's also a family man, also works as an engineer in Intel. I hope I got that right. And practices what he preaches, So, yeah, walks the talk. I hope that was a good enough introduction, right? Or would you like to add?
Yeah, you've summed up my biography in 30 seconds.
Amazing,
So
amazing. So, yeah, I mean, let's probably get right on to it. So, as the listeners might know out there, that I have a coaching business. I run a body transformation platform, and I work with a lot of guys a lot of single dudes basically, who go out on multiple dates per week, which obviously comes at the cost of their sleep schedule being messed up. And one of your expertise is like really, you work shifts basically, from what I know. Like you used to work for 6 months in like the morning shift, 6 months you work in the night shift. So no, for or like a month or something, but your circadian rhythm would often be messed up. So similarly, for the listeners out there, for the clients that I usually work with, their circadian rhythm also tends to get messed up, but for like different reasons because they go out on multiple dates per week, basically. So my question being is sleeping, let's probably say outside your circadian rhythm, let's say at 4 a.m., the same as you sleeping 11 p.m. in case we do it regularly, if that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
so that is a good question. I guess we have to look at sleep architecture and what happens when we go to sleep. Obviously, our brain moves through different processes and different energy states or brainwave states. And what we believe, obviously, from a circadian perspective, is we're more likely to have better quality deep sleep, which is N4, like the end stage of our sleep cycle, where we see these restorative processes like hormone secretion, growth hormone, testosterone, etc. And then as the night progresses, we move from that deeper sleep stage into more frequent rapid eye movement sleep stages, which is the dream sleep stage.
Mm.
So if we have someone who normally goes to bed at 11 p.m. and they're out until the early hours of the morning and they don't get to bed until 4 a.m., their quality of deep sleep is probably going to be hindered because from a circadian alignment perspective, they've missed that peak window opportunity. But that's not to say that they're not going to have deep sleep or that they've missed that opportunity for deep sleep. What they're probably going to sacrifice is the quality of their deep sleep and also the duration of REM sleep that they're going to have. But again, it all comes back to their morning wake time. So if we look at how our circadian pattern operates, obviously our eyes dictate the difference between daytime and nighttime. And obviously the pineal gland is detecting sunlight energy to gather and create melatonin. And melatonin then is your signaling hormone for sleep when the sun sets. So if we look at that circadian alignment and how it correlates to our sleep, on average, our sleep cycles are about 90 minutes in length. So from your very light sleep to the end of your deep sleep, it takes about 90 minutes. And what most people can do is they can divide the time between going to sleep and waking up into windows of 90 minutes. So the way I often explain it is when we're looking at this recommendation of 7.5 hours sleep per night, that really in theory is 5 sleep cycles, 5 90-minute sleep cycles. There are some people who suggest that if you miss a sleep cycle window, that you can make up for it with a nap during the week. So one of the strategies I employed when I was working this day shift, night shift pattern for 7 years was on the days I was beginning night shift, I would sleep in an extra sleep cycle. So I'd go to bed at the same time, but I try and sleep an extra 90 minutes. And then I would try and sleep for 3 hours in that afternoon again before I went in for night shift. And what I've gathered there is three sleep cycles, three by 90 minutes.
Mhm.
And then when I finished night shift, the morning I finished night shift, I would go to bed at the same time at 8:30 or 9 a.m. And I would sleep for two sleep cycles, which was 3 hours. And I was very strict about this. So I'd wake up the second time I wake up naturally, I get out of bed. And that normally was two sleep cycles, two 90-minute sleep cycles. And what I've done there across the week is I've made up for that deficit in sleep by making up for it on the day I'm starting night shift. And I'm not interfering with my nighttime sleep after finishing night shift by only accruing those two sleep cycles. So if I went to bed at 9, woke up at 12, I'd have enough mental and physical energy to get to 9 p.m. that night, where then I'd be able to sleep my normal five sleep cycle duration. So if we have someone who goes to bed at 11 and we count every, 90 minutes as a sleep cycle, what you'll find naturally, and again, this is where people might be surprised, where let's say your normal bedtime is 10 p.m. and you stay up, people are all guilty staying up watching Netflix, watching a show that's, pulling you in. You want to watch the next episode. As you approach 10 p.m., naturally you get tired because your body's falling into alignment with that sleep cycle. But what you'll find is if you get past that first 15, 20 minutes where your circadian alignment is trying to bring you into sleep and you push past it, you're normally awake again. And what you sort of wait for is the next sleep onset cycle, which could be half 11 then if it's 90 minutes. So that's where if you have an event and you miss your bedtime, just plan ahead 90 minutes or plan ahead, you know, 3 hours. You're trying to gather yourself into alignment where you'd naturally be moving through your sleep cycles. And that's often why we get tired at specific points of the day, because every 90 minutes, even though we are consciously awake, that clock is still operating on a 90-minute cycle. So by the time we wake up and we've progressed through five wake windows, if you want to call it that, sometimes you might feel tired around mid-afternoon, due to your body starting to fall into that alignment. Cortisol is dropping a little bit. Mentally, you're getting tired and your body's almost looking for that reset. So if you have someone like this and they're going out and they're enjoying themselves, just have them break out where their sort of sleep window lies and how those sleep cycles align. Sometimes they're not exactly 90 minutes. They can be 70 minutes, 80 minutes, 90, 100. But they're able to get a rough idea of, if I normally go to bed at 11, half 12 is my next sleep opportunity. 2 a.m. is my next opportunity. 3:30 is my next opportunity. And then after that, 5 a.m. So they try and fall into those sleep patterns. And that's probably why, if someone is like that, they go to bed at 11, they can probably wake up at 5 a.m. after having four sleep cycles.
Okay.
And that obviously comes back to the inter-individual need of sleep, that some people might need five sleep cycles, which is the 7.5 hours. Some people might need four, which is the 6 hours. Or some might need five to six, which would go from 7.5 hours to 9 hours in bed. So it's very inter-individual on what a person's specific sleep requirement is day to day. But what we do know is, for optimal sleep hygiene and sleep rituals, we do want to have a set bedtime and a set wake time. And that trains then our sleep and circadian alignment together.
Got it. Got it. Now, so I've got a question on the back of that. So let's probably say if a person is able to fall like his according to his circadian rhythm, they usually begin to feel tired from like the sleep cycle begins from like 11 p.m. onwards, but they got like a bit of a wedding, right? Or they got like a bit of a date. So does it make more sense to pop like a bit of a high dose melatonin a supplement in that particular time just to signal to your body like, hey, we are still keeping your circadian rhythms in check, but we're going to be disrupting it because you're going to be going out. What are your suggestions around that, basically?
So melatonin is the hormone that brings sleep onset on. It initiates the processes of telling your body it's time for sleep. But it's also a very powerful antioxidant. Melatonin is actually synthesized from serotonin. This was the whole concept behind when I created Supplement Needs Sleep Stack was serotonin helps you to fall asleep if you've got a low dopamine or low stimulation environment. And then when you are asleep, you convert your melatonin from serotonin. So it's very important that when we are looking at supporting melatonin of our body, the very first place we start from is serotonin. So in that aspect, what we need to assume then is the person is taking care of their nutritional requirements towards serotonin, first of all, and then look at how critical is it that they miss this window of opportunity by staying up. And in saying that, perhaps they might want to use a low dose of melatonin prior to going to sleep. However, if it's only maybe two sleep cycles where they're going to bed a little bit later in the middle of the night, 1 or 2 a.m., I wouldn't say it warrants having to supplement with very, very high dosages of melatonin.
Mhm.
Those would be more so reserved for someone who was worried about the, I guess, impacts that night shift work can have to their body, whereby you're doing practices to blunt melatonin secretion. So whether that is a daytime stimulatory lamp that stimulates the flux energy of the sun, taking stimulants or things that block the build-up of sleep pressure, and doing other things like exercise in the middle of the night, etc. You're doing things to offset that circadian output of melatonin that would happen naturally. You might want to then supplement with it. But if this is a rare occasion, I mean, rare in that maybe once per week, I'm not going to be too overly concerned for someone who misses one sleep cycle or two sleep cycles from attending an event. Now, in saying that, on average, we produce about 1 to 3 milligrams of melatonin, more so towards the lower end. But again, that's what's secreted at the beginning of the night.
Mhm.
And quite often, this is why people wake up in the middle of the night, is because they've ran out of the production of endogenous melatonin. And so once that endogenous melatonin uh, effectively slows down, your output of cortisol from your adrenal gland starts to pick up in line with your cortisol awakening response. So in that regard, I don't think they need a massive dose of melatonin, but
Yeah.
it might not hurt to help and train them into the next sleep window by providing their body with the signal of here is some melatonin. Melatonin, when it's taken as a supplement, has a half-life of around 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So what we'll find is that oral dose of melatonin clears quite quickly in that most compounds will leave our body after 5 half-lives. This is where relying on melatonin as a sleep aid becomes quite dysfunctional because it gives you roughly 4 to 5 hours of opportunity to take advantage of the melatonin exogenously, I should say. And then your body has to take over and produce its own to keep you asleep. And
Wow.
so that's where it's important that optimize serotonin, optimize the dopamine, the correct sleep environment would encourage your body to make its own melatonin then.
Got it. So like that brings me up with another question. So let's probably say when you take exogenous melatonin, you do like there's a bit of a negative feedback loop. Like your body doesn't it suppresses the endogenous melatonin, right? Because you produce like one milligram or three, but it comes back after you just simply get off the melatonin. But my question being is, if you take, let's say, like exogenous melatonin after a workout, perhaps in the morning, from the perspective of it being an antioxidant. You get the antioxidative benefits of the endogenous melatonin, no, exogenous melatonin. But then at the same time, since nighttime is approaching, you don't suppress your exogenous, no, you don't suppress your endogenous melatonin. And does it make more sense to just supplement with 5-HTP in the night and then you perhaps incorporate the exogenous melatonin perhaps sometime after your workout in the morning? Does that make sense as to what I'm trying to say?
Uh,
Do you get
I
the
can see where I can see what you're asking. I guess we have to be very careful. Antioxidants around our workout window towards the hormetic effect of exercise and inducing stress. There are arguments for and against using antioxidants around the exercise window. Using melatonin in the morning time, I guess it's not like a hormone that is correctly stored within a particular part of the body.
Mhm.
Most of our melatonin is utilized by our mitochondria, and the mitochondria use it as an antioxidant. And this is where the serotonin to melatonin conversion occurs. So if we're topping up the body with exogenous melatonin as an antioxidant, probably makes more sense using it heading into nighttime to align with circadian output. But again, this is where, for someone who perhaps is on a night shift sleeping pattern, they've blunted their melatonin secretion by staying awake all night. Utilizing quite a high dose in the morning time is trying to entrain their body to go to sleep efficiently
Yeah.
and to stay asleep. But they would definitely need to look at 5-HTP as a supplement towards tryptophan and creating serotonin, and then encouraging that serotonin to convert to melatonin with vitamin B5 and B6. So this was like the simple biochemistry surrounding that sleep stack. If they were to, I guess, forego high dose melatonin, this is where getting exposure to sunlight during the day is important because you store then melatonin within the pineal gland of your eye due to exposure of sunlight to what's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus of your brain. And so you're telling your brain it is daytime, here's sunlight. The sunlight's helping in the conversion of melatonin, but it's also training the circadian rhythm that it is a wake window. And it's a useful trick if people are traveling between time zones. You can take advantage of daylight or sunset to train your circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
So if you arrive in a country whereby you have delayed your sleep window, so let's say you've gone uh, east to west, so you've gone back in time. What effectively you've done there is when you should be asleep, you're now awake. The best strategy in that scenario is you try and adjust your clock to your new destination's time before you travel. So it's not as disruptive that, let's say, for example, you are taking a flight at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, UK time or wherever, and you're moving east to west and you're going back in time 8 hours. By the time you arrive at your destination 8 hours later, it's actually 11 p.m. UK time,
Mhm.
but it's really 3 p.m. in this new place. So in theory, what you've sort of done is you've gone from 3 p.m. in your current location to 3 p.m. in theory at your new location, moving backwards 8 hours. And this is I'm just making an example where it's an 8 hour flight with an 8 hour time window. So you've gone back pretty much the same time you've left your original place of, but now your body's trained that it is actually 11 p.m. What you'd want to do during that transition is try and move your sleep windows back so that when you arrive at your destination, you're almost operating on that current sleep time, if that makes sense. And
Oh,
then if you wanted to stimulate yourself to keep awake, you'd go out and seek sunlight as quick as possible to tell your brain, actually, it's not 11 p.m., it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and it's because the sun is up in the sky. Similarly, you get to a new destination and you're supposed to be awake and it's night time. You would try and avoid stimulatory sources of sunlight or light of itself to try and train your body to accept that beyond jet lag that it is nighttime, it's time to go asleep as opposed to being awake. So you can take advantage of that science with,
Yeah.
delaying sleep for events or night shift and trying to train our circadian rhythm towards it.
Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and what's your take on the concept of earthing, basically, when it comes to restoring your sleep patterns relevant to the geographical location that you want? Is there any science to that, basically? Um,
So in what regard would that be?
so let's probably say, like, I've got a client. He goes from, let's say, Dubai. I'm based in Dubai, and he goes to New York, right? Or like where you might go to the
Yeah.
UK. And I'm like, okay, let's probably say it's morning. The first thing that I want you to do is right upon landing over there, uh, get like some caffeine in, and I just want you to go and train because that's gonna like that's gonna like stimulate you, and then spend some time in the sun and walk naked feet in the grass or something like that. So my theory is that let's probably say if you connect to the earth, that I might be wrong right here. Um, you should train your body like at this point of time, like um, these are the things. So does earthing actually help with sleep or no?
It would in one aspect, and that is sort of what I said there previously. You almost want to train your body to this new time zone. So Dubai to UK, depending on the time of year, it's quite often only a 3 hour difference in time, which isn't a huge shift to your circadian alignment. But going from Dubai to New York, I'm going to assume it's somewhere around a 10 hour difference in time,
Yeah,
a 9 to 10 hour difference in time, which is a big difference to surround your circadian rhythm. It's basically flipped. So in that instance, again, if he leaves Dubai at night time and his estimated arrival in New York is morning time, really what he should be trying to do is figure out, do I sleep on the plane or try and sleep properly on the plane? Do I figure out before I travel to New York where I sit now currently with the time difference? And if possible, start going to bed earlier or later, depending on what he wants to do with a circadian rhythm, a couple of days in advance of getting to New York. And so it really takes a bit of balance in between where you are now time wise versus where you're heading time wise. And going east to west is a big change to our body, whereas going west to east is normally less in terms of jet lag. We're able to accommodate with a forward clock as opposed to a backwards clock. In that instance, yeah, things like sunlight as soon as he lands, if it's morning time or afternoon. But we just have to bear in mind, like something like 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon, evening time landing and seeking sunlight when you're already getting ready for bed might not be as wise because you're telling your body, okay, it's still daytime, delay sleep. And so you might end up with some level of jet lag where then you have difficulty going to sleep. So there's a whole science behind this sleep transition and forward thinking of how you're going to make up for the sleep deficit. But it can be still the same again that if you're traveling and you know you're going to be short on sleep, you try and make up for these sleep cycles either the days in advance or the days after when you arrive. Obviously, if you're on business or on vacation, you don't want to be losing time to having to correct sleep issues once you arrive at your destination. So you almost want to preempt the pattern of what you're going to do with your sleep prior to traveling.
got it, got it. All right. That's really, really useful, basically. Thank you so much for that. Now, obviously, I've seen like for the audience out there, and obviously, I've seen like you recently got in a hair transplant, right? Now,
Hmm.
um, I started losing my hair basically like when did I lose my hair? Yeah, 4 years ago, basically. Right? Went on the internet, tried out a couple of things, straight up hopped on minoxidil because the doctor just told me like take like two milliliters of minoxidil, and then the next thing that I know was I was like laying in bed with my heart rate elevated because instead of titrating the dose up, um, I just hopped on minoxidil. Cool. Had a chat with my bodybuilding coach. He's like, "You're better off like tapering it down." 1 milliliter, I was good. And then after consuming some content on the internet, I went on RU5841 topical. Obviously, you've heard about that compound. Fast forward,
Yep.
fast forward like 2 years later, and then suddenly I had libido issues and I felt suicidal. which is not like me. So I pulled that off, and then I went on like low dose finasteride, but topical because I was like really, really scared about it basically. But after doing the research, it's pretty safe compound for 97% of the people out there. Now, what's your take on the oral form of finasteride versus the topical form of finasteride, basically? And which one do you take? Like, is there a difference?
There would be a difference. So that is a great question. I guess with hair loss, we tend to hyper focus on DHT as the main driver of losing hair. So initiating hair follicle death, which is correct to an extent. But there's also a myriad of other root causes that cause our hair follicles to either thin, so the hair shaft thins and we end up with thin hair. And then obviously we end up with recession where the hair shaft recedes in. And then eventually the hair follicle can detach from the stem cells and you lose that hair's potential to grow. DHT is one aspect, estrogen is another. So we need healthy estrogen levels for hair stimulus and blood flow to our scalp. So if we have too low estrogen, it can cause problems, which is where we see a lot of problems with bodybuilders manipulating their estrogen. Nutritional deficiencies or thyroid hormone imbalances. So I've spoken out a lot of my hair loss came from undiagnosed celiac disease and the inflammation and the autoimmunity that came from that problem. But once you lose the hair follicle or it detaches, you can't regrow it again. So it doesn't really matter what drives the process of the hair follicle dying. Once it's dead, you cannot re-stimulate it unless you put an existing hair follicle into that space, which is what a transplant is. So with oral and topical finasteride, the phenomenon that you're talking about is post-finasteride syndrome, so PFS. And what we are starting to believe, or what I believe is the problem with post-finasteride syndrome, is effectively a dissociation between the energetics of the body, or for some people, there might actually be detox issues at the liver, which has caused a shift in hormone balance.
Yeah.
When we look at any medication, when we take a medication orally, it has to be broken down by the stomach and then systemically absorbed from your stomach into your small intestine and then into your blood peripheral circulation, where then it reaches either the tissues for action or reaches the liver generally first, and then it's passed into circulation. So any oral medication will have the ability to reach every tissue of your body in theory. So it's open access. It's not a very targeted way. And if we take a medicine like finasteride, which is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, which is the enzyme that makes DHT, we have the potential for blocking that enzyme everywhere in the body. And there are two isoforms, or up to three actually, of 5-alpha reductase within our body. And what we're blocking with finasteride is one particular form of 5-alpha reductase, which we believe exists mainly in the scalp, which then creates DHT locally, which initiates hair follicle death. However, blocking DHT conversion may have effects towards a male's libido from an androgenic perspective, because DHT is a much more potent androgen than testosterone. But the other side of it is DHT is made locally and not systemically. So it's made inside our tissues where it takes action first. It's not a systemically circulating hormone. So if we take the oral version, there's a higher chance that we will absorb more of the drug, that it will go to target tissues more effectively, but it's in a more global sense. If we apply finasteride topically to the hair follicles, especially in the frontal region of our scalp, we are hopefully having a more targeted effect on the hair follicle cells themselves locally, where they're expressing 5-alpha reductase, and blocking it locally before it's absorbed into systemic circulation. So your dermal layer, whether it's your skin of your arm or on your scalp, will only accommodate molecules that have up to a 500 Dalton chemical weight or gram per mole weight. So very small molecules will only have the ability to pass through our upper dermal layers and reach tissues. This is where potentially finasteride has a much lower chance of going into systemic circulation. Similarly with minoxidil. Minoxidil was originally designed to be a blood pressure medication, and the hair growth was a side effect observed. And that hair growth was because of an increase in blood flow to the target areas. So, taking advantage of that, we apply it topically to encourage blood flow to the scalp, which then brings nutrients and other growth factors to help your hair grow. So, if someone was worried about PFS, I'd also have them think about, well, what is their current lifestyle and nutrition compounding to potential PFS? The 5 alpha reductase enzyme is reliant on NAD. So everyone's probably heard about NMN as a supplement, or vitamin B3, which creates nicotinamide mononucleotides, and then NMN becomes NAD,
Yeah,
nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide. So NAD is what your body uses for helping with energy conversion processes. A dysfunction to your NAD levels then disrupts how 5 alpha reductase works. So if you've taken a medication that blocks 5 alpha reductase from working properly and the medication leaves your system, for a time you're probably going to experience issues with this enzyme while it tries to upregulate the number of copies of the enzyme naturally again. But if you have these deficits nutritionally, you're probably going to see this shift in your neurochemical balance because you blocked DHT
yeah,
with oral drug, whereby you then have to really assess the quality of your nutrition, your energetic state of the body. Your mitochondria are the guys who make your hormones as well as your energy, and they use a lot of NAD. So when someone has PFS, in my view, the very first place you look is the mitochondria and the energetics of the body, and try and reverse whatever dysfunction is going on within the mitochondria, within the DHT creation process, or where there's a backlog of estrogen causing an issue at the liver again, and you're favoring the excretion of DHT. There's a whole myriad of things that play into it.
yeah,
But as you said, roughly 3% of people will experience these side effects.
yeah,
They are very real, they are very well documented. At one point, it was believed to be psychosomatic, where it was just in a person's head. But we do know from a nutrition perspective, neurochemical aspect, it is very real. And it can be treated and it can be, in theory, reversed. It just takes a bit of diligence to figure out what is the root cause after using the compound that needs to be fixed.
yeah. Okay, that's beautiful. That probably brings me up with a couple of. It makes me open up a new can of worms. So in the West, right? You like topical finasteride is not really available like that from the knowledge that I've gathered basically. Whereas I'm from India, so in India, literally the pharmaceutical industry is like crazy. So they come up with their own formulations. And recently, I've been like first I started off with the oral form of finasteride and there were no side effects because I'm on top of my nutrition. I use chronometer to track my calories and macros, and I get most of my nutrients from food, etc. Like that's the basics for most of the people out there. Most of the people don't even do that, and they had a poor body composition. So you're like priming yourself for side effects if you do hop on the drug. But I was like, okay, now the oral form of finasteride doesn't really give me anything. Let me just see how little I can take and get away with it. So from 1 milligram, I tape it down to 0.75 and 0.25. And then the other day, like my parents got me a topical finasteride, and the carrier was it had a lipid-based carrier basically. Whereas most of the compounds out there, they use a propylene glycerol carrier, if that makes perfect sense, which is far more absorbed by your scalp. But if you use a lipid-based carrier, and as per the molecular weight of finasteride, do you think less of that is going to be seeping through your scalp because lipids will probably be staying far longer on your scalp, if that makes perfect sense. Like, what's your theory with regard to that?
No, that is a good question. I guess you've raised the question between what carries the drug into the body. So we use propylene glycol and glycerol based, or even in certain instances, alcohol based, like propanol and methanol based sprays as well, just due to the solubility of the drug. So the drug has to be soluble in this carrier where it's within the liquid matrix. And that's what you're applying onto the scalp. And what you're hoping for is the carrier moves through the skin layers and it brings the drug with it. And then obviously we metabolize that carrier. The carrier is not benign. It still has to be metabolized by your body once it's in circulation. It's just it brings the drug. The drug is basically getting a free trip into the body. And more safer ones, I guess, yes, if we have a lipid based topical, which is more phospholipid based, and our skin cells have a phospholipid membrane, there is probably some merit there that you're going to slow down absorption straight through into the bloodstream of the scalp, and you're delivering this molecule directly to the skin cells or the hair follicle cells themselves. With your question even about the oral standard prescription, it can be sometimes quite crazy. It can be 1 milligram pretty much every day. It can go up to as high as 2.5 milligrams orally. That if we even look at the kinetics of the drug, so the pharmacokinetics and how it's eliminated from the body, finasteride on average has a half-life of around 9 hours, 9 to 10 hours on average, off the top of my head, which tells me that if you take a 1 milligram dose, it's going to take up to 50 hours for the drug to be cleared by your body. And so, if we know that 50 hours is basically over 2 days, why would we need to do 1 milligram every single day? Because you're overlapping in the drug's actions. And quite often, prescription protocols for compounds are just for patient compliance and ease of use. It'd be very difficult to tell someone take 1 milligram of finasteride Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Tuesday, every other day, they'd forget. Whereas you tell someone take a tablet every single day, their compliance to taking the compound is a lot higher. Or the outcome is going to be much better because they've got the drug staying in their system at a stable rate.
Hmm.
But that stable rate might actually be too much of the compound.
Yeah.
So what you've done there is quite clever. You've reduced the dose to what is most appropriate for you in terms of the minimal effective dose. But then you can get, if you have good compliance and you remember to take these things, there's nothing to say that 0.5 milligram orally every 2 to 3 days doesn't put you in the same scenario as someone taking 1 milligram every single day. But you have to then view that different people have different liver metabolisms, which is how a lot of drugs are metabolized to get rid of them out of the body. But we can do a bit more of a targeted approach to utilizing medication in this fashion.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of current research is going into pharmacogenomics, which is using your genetics to understand how a medication is going to work in your body. And you can pretty much calculate or predict the success rates of minoxidil for a person or even finasteride. And I guess one of the future predictions you'd look for something like this is based on your current nutrition, health, and your overall, I guess, blood profile, neurotransmitter balance. In theory, we may be able to screen if you take this compound, there is a risk here that you're going to experience these side effects.
Right.
So yeah, the topical application, it really does make a difference, the form of how it is absorbed. And also for certain people, they cannot use alcohol based compounds because it causes local site irritation on their scalp. So they end up with a dry, flaky, itchy scalp, which then makes their hair follicle health even worse,
Yeah.
trying to deliver a compound that's trying to fix their hair loss.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. This is actually awesome. Now, thank you so much for that. And also, I wanted to ask. Now, I don't take any androgens, but I like to like optimize my health. So, like I take metformin because of its benefits, and then I also take like Cialis. Then I started digging into the research around Cialis. It does act as a vasodilator basically, and in the same way as minoxidil basically operates as, because minoxidil was originally prescribed as a bit of a blood pressure medication, and they found out like, it does grow hair basically. But I was like, okay, if minoxidil does grow hair, in the oral form, what do you think about Cialis? Because it does act as a vasodilator as well, right?
Yeah, so Cialis tends to be a prophylactic medication that a lot of men take as a blood pressure control, as opposed to being a direct impact to their, um, I guess, penal health.
Mhm.
When we look at what primarily is happening with something like Cialis or even Viagra, these tadalafil drugs or tadalafil or sildenafil drugs, these PDE5 inhibitors have a knock-on effect where when they take effect on CGMP, they end up improving the production of nitric oxides. And nitric oxide, endothelial nitric oxide, so you've got different forms of nitric oxide enzymes in your body. Endothelial nitric oxide creates vasodilation, which then improves blood flow to the body, which in theory, from a hair scalp perspective, if we are improving blood flow throughout the whole body, improving endothelial nitric oxide production, it could have a benefit over onto your scalp health as well. So it can be a useful thing for improving sexual performance. It can be useful as an ergogenic aid for physical performance. So you're improving nitric oxide creation, which then helps bring more nutrients and oxygen delivery to your tissues being exercised. And in theory, it could help offset any hypoxic effects to your scalp due to improving local blood flow. So yeah, it's a very interesting molecule. We're seeing a lot of medications be repurposed or redesigned in their application from a biohacking perspective,
Yeah,
like metformin having its ability to improve our liver's sensitivity to glucose and glycogen synthesis. We see its effects over onto mTOR as a longevity aid, potentially. And as well as that, having an effect over onto um, improving our body's ability to switch between anabolic and catabolic energy pathways between mTOR and AMPK, where we're getting the benefits of anabolism from potentially training and nutrition, and we're getting the benefits then of AMPK activation or fasting mimetic, where we're resetting the body and repairing it favorably. So yeah, very interesting question.
got it, got it. No, thank you so much for that. Now, one thing that I also wanted to ask you is, this is a bit of a bro science question, but you've obviously seen the cliche stereotype, right? Like a lot of bodybuilders have low IQ levels. It's like all muscle and no brains, basically, because obviously there's like brain inflammation. But my theory with regards to that is there's like far more blood flow going to the muscle cells rather than the brain, as a result of which they're not training themselves um, for better nutrient partitioning to the brain. So I was listening to one of the podcasts, and then I was like, okay, so instead of like hopping on SSRIs, instead of taking modafinil, instead of taking Adderall and all of that, or just taking copious amounts of nootropics, what do you think about doing things like basics, like cursive writing, using like brain training apps like Elevate, etc. Or just putting like a bit of a red light cap on your head? Is there any merit to that before you hop on all of these compounds? And is it true that bodybuilders are dumb, basically? That's a
It's
controversial statement.
a very controversial question. I guess you're relating to there is a published paper, which is a cohort analysis. It's not a case controlled study or a random controlled trial either, where they basically subjectively and objectively asked a survey of questions on college graduates who had used nandrolone and those who hadn't. And he found the ones who had used nandrolone, in theory, had cognitive deficits or a drop in IQ. That isn't uncommon if we look at what steroids do to the body. in terms of there's a push and pull system at play. When you take an anabolic, you're improving your body's ability to repair things and to utilize nutrients. One of the consequences of aging is cellular turnover. So you're replicating cells and slowly unwinding your DNA with each replication. So if you are taking a substance which is speeding up cellular replication to improve, obviously, bigger muscles, and in the context of strength training or bodybuilding, there is a risk there that we are going to create problems in the machinery that are creating the new proteins. So we're going to create misfolded proteins. We're going to create oxidative stress or the requirement of antioxidants because the mitochondria, which are producing the energy to fuel the anabolic processes, are pumping out a lot of oxidants that our body then quenches with glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase. You're trying to counteract this accelerated aging process with endogenous antioxidants. But
Oh,
if we don't have enough antioxidants, especially within our brain, your neurons are going to suffer. So you're going to see localized oxidative stress. But you're also going to see oxidative stress within a neuron depending on neurotoxicity. So neurons will die as a consequence of not having enough antioxidants to combat this event. But also, if a neuron becomes overly excited with too much neurotransmitter, so we have this excitotoxicity where we've produced way too much dopamine for that neuron and the neuron gets completely overstimulated, there's a fine balance of that neuron's threshold that the neuron can become basically overstimulated and die. And we know that these compounds, as a consequence of being an androgen, which improves our dopamine level, can, in one theory, cause dopamine overexcitation, which kills the neuron or diminishes the neuron sensitivity. And what we'll find with certain people, if they don't do practices like what you're saying, take care of their antioxidant balance, take care of their brain health. So, again, being self aware of what's going on within their brain and what one of the things that can play over into this excitotoxicity is very heightened libido or engaging in intercourse way beyond what would be normally capable of your brain's physiology. You set then the standard for your brain that you need such a high dopamine level for your brain to actually be stimulated to operate efficiently. And so you do see potential cognitive decline in bodybuilders as they age from the damage they've done from using certain compounds. So, like you've sort of raised, there is a lot of things available to us from a biohacking perspective. Nootropics might influence how we create the neurotransmitters, how we transport them, how we repackage them back into the vesicles to reuptake and use them again, to create neural branching links, or you're creating branches between neurons. But we have to bear in mind, regardless of these strategies, once a neuron in your brain has died or become overstimulated, you cannot repair it,
yeah,
or it takes a very, very long time for nerves to repair themselves that goes beyond like clinical merit.
yeah,
So all strategies should rely on, aside from like your heart health, oxidative stress, liver, kidneys, etc., the brain is a fascinating part of steroid use that I originally started talking about because I seen these changes in neurochemistry in young men stopping the use of anabolic steroids, where physiologically their hormone creation of their body was absolutely perfect. So they're creating all their natural fertility hormone, they're creating normal total testosterone within their testicle, but they have all these symptoms of low libido, low drive, apathy, a loss of pleasure or anhedonia. And it all stems back to their neurochemistry has changed completely in response to the high androgen level. And so we have to be very self-aware when we're looking at these compounds that they have neurochemical effects. It's not just the cardiotoxicity, the effects on your heart health or your kidneys or your liver, which is where a lot of the stigma has come from with steroids equaling bad outcomes, health outcomes. It's more so from my view that the neurotoxicity element, especially in the abuse today versus back 15, 20 years ago, where it was a very niche population that were using these compounds, young kids or even teenagers are getting access to these compounds and don't realize these neurochemical effects, which you're rightfully bringing up that we could be setting ourselves up for a future population of young abusers who end up with very bad cognitive deficits, whereby the medical community are years behind in terms of acknowledgement or research on these detriments, which could put a big burden or pressure on healthcare systems, mental health services. So it is vital that we try and create this awareness that, yes, they create imbalances with cholesterol, they create oxidative stress and accelerated aging. But the other thing that is vital to get across as a point is that it really will upset your brain chemistry if you don't have the self-awareness skills, if you're not emotionally mature, and that you don't fall into this repetitive use pattern that's almost in line with abuse behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was really, really good because you and Vigorously are one of the are some of the few people in the industry who speak about managing your oxidative stress, whereas most of the people don't even like, hell, I'm based in the Middle East, right? And you know how the Middle Eastern bodybuilding is like. It's take grams of gear, uh, eat fish, like fish and veggies, but don't keep the logbook, don't stay on top of your antioxidants. So yeah, you bring up a really, really good point. Um, Doc, do we have 10 minutes? Because I got to be really,
Yeah, let's go for it.
yeah. So this like I work with a lot of Indians, right? And because I'm Indian as well. And one of the major this is obviously a Gen Pop question. I don't know if you ever coach Gen Pop clients, um, but they usually like to bring this weasel up. I can't get in shape because of my genetics. Now, a couple of years ago, I'm like, shut the fuck up. You know, you just need to toughen up. But then I started dwelling into the research basically, and started looking into the fact like, okay, why is this the case? So, I mean, due to colonization, most of the Western countries had access to more meat, basically, because of which the protein transcription is higher in these countries, because predominantly, and whereas most of the Eastern countries, due to colonization, had no other chance than to rely on more like simple carbohydrates for food. As a result of which, that leads to lesser protein transcription, and that also leads to lesser expression of the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, and that probably leads to a whole new range of advantages and disadvantages. So let's probably say like people in the East relatively find it easier to put on weight, like in the form of fat, but like need to work their butt off when it comes to putting on muscle. But like as and when you probably go further west, obviously this is a stereotype, but what's your take on that? Do genetics make that much of a big difference? And why do those genetic differences exist if they exist in the first place with regards to this? Um,
I guess that is a very popular question, even um, I guess ethnicity aside, or even global population, when we even consider like the obesity epidemic, if we want to call it that, and whether that is driven by genetics or not. And there is no doubt that genetics play a role into certain outcomes, but also we have to view that genetics, when you're born with a set of genetics, it's the epigenetic control or the environmental switch that really dictates whether or not you're at risk of having this genetic problem.
mhm,
So for example, if we were to view someone has the genetics for potential issues with diabetes, insulin sensitivity, they have maybe a higher production of adiponectin. So they have this enzyme that is cued to create fat cells more so than other types of cells. We then have to work backwards in terms of, well, what is creating that fat storage? Is it the genetics or is it the food availability going into the system alongside other things? And I guess on one side, knowing your genetics and having the responsibility to acknowledge and accept that that is present would help steer someone towards better psychological food choices that would improve body composition. So there is no doubt that there is probably some level of genetic control. But again, it comes back to what I always go on about the mitochondria. The mitochondria are what are using glucose and fatty acids for energy production. The knock-on effect from that then globally in the body will dictate, depending on food availability, food sources, what you do with that food. So we do know that dietary fats are a lot easier to incorporate into adipocytes, into fat cells, and carbohydrates, depending on availability, insulin sensitivity, glycogen storage, and everything else like that. De novo lipogenesis, making fat from carbohydrates, can occur, but you have to be chronically ingesting a high amount of carbohydrates for a long period of time without any sources of fat in your nutrition to create fat from carbohydrates. So when we bear that in mind, one part of it, I believe, it can be related back to genetics, but really the responsibility falls back onto the epigenetics, which you are in control of, which is your lifestyle and your environment. Now, in saying that, you add other deeper layers, which again makes it very difficult, especially even with obesity, because there are socio-economic factors. So you have to view availability of food. A certain population may have great access to grains as carbohydrate sources and be very cost effective, whereas something like protein sources and meat, depending on farming availability, storage, everything else, it could be less available to them. So over time, the generation epigenetics that have been passed on, because we know that when you have your genetics, the epigenetics of how they're expressed are passed on generation to generation. So if, for example, your grandparents had genetics more towards, let's say, high cholesterol and the enzymes that are involved with cholesterol production, your parents will have inherited that genetic uh, component and potentially the genetic switch is turned on already. It may be turned off, but there is a high rate of probability that it is turned on. So now your parents, as soon as they're born, are born with a risk of having high cholesterol depending on how their body is fueled.
Yeah.
And you pass that down to the next generation, again, they're at an even bigger risk potentially if it's been passed down generation to generation. That if it is a problem surrounding fat metabolism, you are then at risk of not only having body composition problems, higher circulating levels of fatty acids in your bloodstream are going to impair your insulin sensitivity. So you're going to have lower insulin sensitivity or at risk of having to produce more insulin, which over time leads to type 2 diabetes.
Mm. Yeah.
That third generation to speak didn't have a control or say in how their genetics were expressed that already came from the two previous generations.
Okay.
But that bearing in mind, they have a choice psychologically of whether they eat cheesecake or whether they eat, a high protein meal to suit their genetics. So there is a bit of push and pull that would be very, I guess, a very negative way to
Yeah.
phase it, that it's just genetics, and or it's all your fault, so just man up. There
Yeah.
has to be a sort of a sway in the middle. One of it does have a factor, but on the other side, you have to be socially responsible. That if you have these genetics, well then, to be honest, you should be eating to suit your genetics.
Yeah.
And I'd be a classic example that when I went back through my genetics, I inherited the HLA gene, which is what leaves you susceptible to celiac disease or gluten autoimmunity. And that only turned on in my 30s with an exposure to a toxin that now I'm in control of if I eat gluten, I will have a lot of health negatives like increased heart disease risk, increased liver disease, increased bowel cancer. So, for the sake of eating a slice of cake and all these health consequences, is that short term gain really worth the overall net picture?
Yeah.
And the same could be viewed if someone has genetics towards higher rates of fat gain. Is it really worth, in the context of their future health goals or even body composition goals, to eat the cake? And
Yeah.
that's not to say that they should avoid cake all the time. It's that within context and within your sort of energy balance and how your body's favoring that energy source, is that food appropriate at this moment in time?
Oh, okay.
And it's developing that awareness. So yeah, it's a very complex question, but it's good to bring up.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I'd like to go to one last question, but really appreciate
Yeah.
your take. Now, this is from a bodybuilder that, like, in the gym, I frequently have a chat with him every now and then. He asked me, like, what's your take on food intolerances and how to eliminate and reintroduce, basically?
So again, I've sort of probably follows on from my own personal experience. Um, Food intolerances. So we can break down food intolerances into a sensitivity, an allergy, or a full-blown autoimmunity. If we have a food allergy, it's an allergic response producing either histamine or antibodies. So a food allergy can be a very bad thing, or it can be a minor consequence where you produce histamine, you get a rash or you get diarrhea, and it tells you, okay, you're probably best avoiding that allergic food. A food intolerance might be that your gut microbiome is intolerant of that food. So again, the intolerance might lead to physical symptoms like bloating, distension, gas production. You have an intolerance to that food because of the consequences that are arising within the gut, absorbing and digesting that food. It doesn't mean that you should avoid that food forever, but the intolerance is telling you, okay, as it stands, your current landscape of your gut doesn't have the capacity to take this food in high amounts or at all. And then you have autoimmunity conditions or genetic problems like lactose intolerance, where when you have lactose, your gut bacteria produce a lot of fatty acids that then flushes your gut. So you actually end up with a very rapid bowel movement. You can have issues with histamine where you're not making enough DAO enzyme within the gut because the gut lining has been worn down, whether it's from medications, stress, the environment, local imbalance of bacteria. And so, with this consequence, then the elimination diet is taking a food away that is very inflammatory to the body as a whole. In today's day and age, like your top culprits for food sensitivities are going to be gluten and milk protein. So gluten is a umbrella term for a type of protein called a prolamine. It's not that wheat is gluten. Gluten is just a protein. So wheat has a protein called gliadin, and that is the gluten in wheat. Oats have avenin, which is another type of gluten protein. So even when you're eating oats, gluten-free oats, even for that matter, there is still gluten in oats called avenin. It just means that gluten-free oats haven't been cross-contaminated with wheat. Quite often they're processed in the same factory, wheat and oats.
Got it.
So normally in elimination diet, the very first two things that can come out is grains. So you go back to like a very basic carbohydrate setup with potato, rice. Rice even has gluten to warrant that, called oryzanine, but it's in a 1 to 2% total amount of the protein in the grain. Corn, which has zein, which can be a reactive protein for some, but you develop a list of carbs between potatoes, any variation of potato, rice, corn, buckwheat, and maybe quinoa or quinoa as your five sort of staples that you build your nutrition around. Similarly, with milk protein, casein A1 or A2 is the type of milk protein and dairy. it is quite reactive to a lot of people's guts. So it's not even the lactose we're considering here, it's the actual protein, milk protein, which can be pro-inflammatory to the gut. What you'd do is you'd eliminate these two foods and assess how your gut health improves over four to 5 weeks. And then after that 4 to 5 weeks, you pick a gluten containing food or you pick a dairy produce and you incorporate one of them into a couple of meals for a couple of days and assess what happens with your gut. What you'll probably find with the elimination approach is your stool pattern will massively improve. So ideally, you should only have one bowel movement per day upon wake or in the evening, afternoon time, depending on your circadian pattern, and at most two, based on stomach transit time being 12 to 18 hours. So you might have a bowel movement in the morning and a bowel movement in the evening, and that's sort of your standard bowel approach. If you're having multiple bowel movements during the day, it can be a sign of slow gastric emptying so that your stomach doesn't have the capacity to take food. Even though you might feel hungry, your gut doesn't have the space to take what's in your stomach. And so, without forcing you to get sick and throw up, the nerve signaling between your stomach and colon basically flushes you. So, you have to run to the bathroom to make space for the food in your stomach. So people often think when they eat a meal and they have to run to the bathroom within 20 minutes to have a bowel movement that can be quite loose, that they think, oh, I've ate something there that didn't really agree with me. In one instance, within 30 minutes, small traces of gluten and milk protein can go into the small intestine. But quite often, it's the volume of food sitting in the stomach that the colon then basically tells the body, I don't have space for that meal, so I'm going to make space, and it flushes out the lower colon. So you have a
Oh,
rapid bowel movement. So there's a nerve signal between your colon and your stomach to tell you, have you got the space for that food or not?
right.
So with the elimination approach, they're the two main culprits. Then you go down like a rabbit hole of FODMAPs, which are fructose oligo, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and fermentable carbs that you're trying to figure out gut internal health of how you're handling certain types of sugars or polyols and how your gut is tolerating them. So again, we're coming back to more intolerance than allergy. And then a low histamine diet where again your DAO enzyme, which breaks down histamine in your gut, is made inside the mucosal layer of your intestine cells. That can be sheared down over time, that you have a sensitivity to histamine, and high levels of histamine in your body will cause different side effects where it's rash, brain fog, heaviness feeling to your body, blood pressure dysregulation, or even diarrhea where you flush out the histamine out of your gut rapidly. You're you're looking for an improvement in all these symptoms by taking these foods away and strategically picking, one or two foods where it's a high FODMAP food or a high histamine food again to test what happens to the internal balance.
Got it. Got it. No, that was really, really interesting. So yeah, obviously we got like tons of questions, but Dr. Dean, thank you so much for your time. I can't express my gratitude on how generous you've been. And yeah, I'd like to add in a few plugins because yeah, I would love to give you a massive shout out. So where can people find you, basically?
No, especially Ash. My Instagram is DeanSTM. I have our website, supplementneeds.co.uk. For your Dubai listeners, Supplement Needs is available from Ken Nutrition. So if they want to search up Ken Nutrition's website or reach out to them on Instagram, they have our whole host of products out there as well. So it's been a pleasure to speak with you and educate your listeners.
Thank you so much. And you get like a bit of an affiliate code as well, right?
Yeah, for our website, if anyone wants to save 10%, Dr. Dean will save you 10% off our entire website.
Amazing. People and listeners out there, I can't really speak highly. Like the supplements are really good, especially the sleep stack, because it's got a formulation of vitamin B6, it's got 5-HTP, it's got all the stuff that you need. And it's going to save you a lot of money as well because the right ingredients are there. So instead of like you going and purchasing the supplements individually, the right ingredients are formulated in a way that you get a bigger bang for your buck, and they are highly effective. So yeah. Um, and anything else that you'd like to say? Doc?
No, I appreciate those kind words.
Yeah. All right. Let me just